Hello, this is Roy Blight. We're coming to you again. Last week I had to take off. I had a viral infection. In fact, I'm just recovering now. I feel a lot better. I feel really good now, but my head's still kind of clogged up. I'm not hearing right yet, but I'm back. I can function again. Last week was a lost week, so I apologize for being out all this time. And so we're continuing today with our study into the book of Philemon. And as we look into this book of Philemon, remember that Paul is writing to his friend Philemon about a slave that had escaped by the name of Onesiphorus. And we're going to pick up right in the meat today of this discussion that they're having. And Paul is getting right to the heart of the matter. So understand that you're reading somebody else's mail here, but there's a lot there for us to glean, and we want to understand it that way. Now, Philemon, this is all regarding Onesimus now. Paul wrote, "Therefore, though I might be very bold in Messiah to command you what is fitting, yet for love's sake I rather appeal to you. Being such a one as Paul, the aged and now also a prisoner of Messiah Yeshua." Remember, Paul could have pulled rank here. He said, "Listen, I'm the Apostle Paul, and you need to do what I'm telling you to do, for the Lord's sake." He could have done all that, but he said, "No, I'm going to approach you as a friend about this matter because it's important." Paul wrote, "I appeal to you for my son Onesimus, whom I have begotten while in my chains, who once was unprofitable to you, but now is profitable to you and to me." So notice that he's marrying the idea that Onesimus being with him now is helping Philemon, because Philemon is part of the body of Messiah and the gospel and so forth. Of course, under the surface, Paul made it clear that he had the right to command you what is fitting, yet he appealed in love. And this is an important lesson for us to learn. Sometimes we want to pull rank, sometimes for your husband or a father or whatever. And no, the better appeal is to do it in love. Paul normally was not hesitant to command when the situation demanded it. You see this in his letters. However, in wisdom, he knew when to use a loving appeal, and this was one of those times. So this is an important distinction to make and to understand about Paul's reasoning here, is because Philemon was his friend. Philemon was part of the body of Messiah. He was probably a leading man in the body of Messiah there in Colossae. And Onesimus was his property and had escaped and came to Paul. And now we had this awkward situation. Paul wrote, "Being such a one as Paul, the aged, and now also a prisoner of Yeshua, the Messiah." Now, notice how he's saying, "Listen, I'm normally the apostle. Right now, I'm a prisoner myself." It was clear that Paul would ask a favor of Philemon here. This is the attitude that he's portraying. He's not coming, he's not demanding. He's asking, and he's asking it humbly in the place of a favor. Before he asked, he appealed to Philemon's sympathies by the way he described himself. "Paul, the aged, I'm an old man, and his circumstances. I'm an old man, and I'm a prisoner." And this is the way Paul approached this situation. And notice how Paul didn't try to put any kind of religious jargon in, and he didn't try to use any kind of coercion or control. Since Paul would make his appeal based on love, he did what he could to stir up the loving sympathy of Philemon. "Philemon, before I tell you what I need from you, remember that I am an old man and a prisoner at that." So this is basically what he's saying. Now, again, Onesimus was an escaped slave who had escaped from his master Philemon. When Onesimus escaped, he had fled to Rome and, intentionally or not, met with Paul. Paul, being Paul, while under house arrest by the Romans, led Onesimus to faith in Yeshua the Messiah. He said, "Whom I have begotten while in my chains." That means he led him to the Lord, is what he was saying. Now, when Paul made this appeal on behalf of Onesimus, he followed deep traditions in Roman culture. There was an ancient Greek law inherited by the Romans allowing any escaped slave sanctuary at an altar. Now, the altar could even be the hearth of a private family home. Then the head of the family was obligated to give the slave protection while he tried to persuade him to return to his master. That was the custom in Rome, as it was in the custom of ancient Greece as well. So this is all very much in the culture of the known world then. If the slave refused, the head of the family would put the slave up for auction and give the price for the slave to the former master. That's how it was normally held. Now, Paul gave Onesimus protection and now was working the issue out with Philemon. So that's the context, and that's the gist of this entire book of Philemon. So Paul is intervening for this young man. Actually, we don't really know how old Onesimus was. Now, Onesimus, it says, had become profitable to Paul. He was waiting on Paul and helping Paul. Perhaps he served as an assistant to Paul during his house arrest. Therefore, Philemon's runaway slave Onesimus was now unprofitable to Philemon since he escaped. However, in Rome, Onesimus had become profitable, of course, to Paul. When Paul spoke of Onesimus being unprofitable and profitable, he was making a play on a word. The name Onesimus means profitable. Now that he was a fellow believer in Messiah, perhaps Onesimus could actually live up to his name, is actually what Paul is trying to say here in a clever kind of roundabout way. By making this clear to Philemon, Paul was gently hinting that he would like to retain the services of this escaped slave, though he would not command or demand Philemon to do this. So Philemon had a choice, and this is what Paul's appealing was all about. So it was about forgiveness, and he was asking a favor, and he was trying to have Philemon have a heart toward Onesimus, and so on and so on. Now, Paul had sent Onesimus back to Philemon with the hope that Philemon would allow him to return again to Paul. Keep in mind, if Onesimus wanted to, he could have just gone anywhere else. He said, I am sending him back. You therefore receive him, that is, my own heart, whom I wish to keep with me, that on your behalf he might minister to me in my chains for the gospel. So Paul had this letter written for the sake of Onesimus. He gave the letter to Onesimus to hand over to Philemon when he returned to Philemon from his having been an escaped slave. So this must have been an awkward position for Philemon to be put in a very real way. Paul wrote, but without your consent, I wanted to do nothing, that your good deed might not be by compulsion, as it were, but voluntary. Onesimus had done something wrong in that he had escaped from his master. It was time to set that right, so Paul was willing to send him back. Yet Paul obviously wanted Philemon to deal gently with Onesimus. So under Roman law, the slave owner had complete and total control over his slave. There was no question. It was not unusual for slaves to be crucified for lesser offenses than escaping. It was a brutal time to be a slave in the Roman culture, even if it was in Greece for them. So understand that this is what they were dealing with in a normal setting, but this was not a normal setting. These were spirit-filled believers in Yeshua. This is the Apostle Paul. In Roman law, there were virtually no limits to the power of the master over his slave. Again, the alternative of life or death rested solely with Philemon. Slaves were continually crucified again for lesser offenses. Now, when you consider the huge number of slaves in the Roman Empire, they thought harsh punishment against escaped or rebellious slaves very necessary. In an empire with as many as 60 million slaves, the Roman Empire, there was constant fear of slave uprisings and revolts. So this is a constant source of trouble for the empire. And when a runaway slave was captured, they might be crucified or branded with a red-hot iron on the forehead with the letter F for fugitive on their forehead. So considering all of these societal factors, we understand better Paul's plea to Philemon. Philemon, I know this man has done you wrong and deserves to be punished, but consider him as my own heart and be merciful to him. So Paul is appealing to Philemon's heart of mercy, which is not the Roman way of justice at all. And so this is the real detailed part of this letter that we need to understand. Clearly, Paul wanted Onesimus to stay because he had become a big help to him. And Paul sweetened his appeal in three different ways. First, if Onesimus stayed, he could serve Paul on Philemon's behalf. Philemon, he said, if you leave Onesimus with me, it is like you serving me because Onesimus is your rightful servant. So he was, by proxy, going to be able to help the Apostle Paul. Paul put this before him. Secondly, if Onesimus stayed, he would be helping someone in great need. Philemon, I know Onesimus might be of some use to you, yet I'm in chains and need all the help I can get. And then thirdly, it helped the man in chains for the gospel's sake, for the sake of the gospel of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, to go forward. Philemon, please don't forget why I'm here in chains. Remember that it is for the sake of the gospel. So he put it out there for him in this way. Paul was a great salesman here. Paul made his appeal and made it strong, and he made it skillfully. At the same time, he really did leave the decision to Philemon. He would appeal in love, but he would not trample over the rights of Philemon either. And this is the context of this letter. He said that your good deed might not be by compulsion, as it were, but voluntary. So he made sure that Philemon understand that this was his choice, not Paul's choice. Paul was not going to try to coerce him. Paul would not force a decision on Philemon. Now, if Paul demanded it, then Philemon's good deed would come by compulsion and not be voluntary. This would make the whole affair unpleasant and rob Philemon of any reward he otherwise might have had. It also would have probably caused Philemon to never trust the Apostle Paul again. So understand that there's a lot going on here just in the relationship between Philemon and Paul. And this is Paul's structure in reading this and giving this to Philemon. So that he was trying to save the relationship, but he was trying to also have Onesimus back with him. But he was going to leave that up to Philemon, and this is where we're going to end it today. If you'd like, please subscribe to the station, hit the like button. God bless you. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you next time.